Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Deborah Landau. I direct the creative writing program here at NYU, and we are absolutely delighted to be presenting Eileen Myles tonight in conversation with Alice Quinn. This program is part of our new Salon series, which we present in partnership with the Poetry Society of America. I'd like to thank everybody at the PSA, Alice Quinn, Brett Lauer, Lauren Macius, and everyone at NYU, Joanna Yaz and Soren Sockman, for making tonight possible. The format of tonight's evening: Alice will introduce Eileen, Eileen will read, the two of them will be in conversation in these nice chairs. She'll answer your questions, and then we'll have a book signing. So it's going to be really great. And now, very pleased to turn the evening over to your host, Alice Quinn, the Executive Director of the Poetry Society of America.
Welcome everyone, and thanks to Soren and Deborah of NYU's writing program, and to Brett Fletcher Lauer, Deputy Director of the PSA, for their help in putting this program together. It's a true pleasure to introduce Eileen Myles, who, as you will see from your program, has published 19 books of poetry, criticism, fiction, and memoir. Zowie, that is really amazing. Her new books are I Must Be Living Twice, new and selected poems, and a reissue of her memoir, Chelsea Girls, first published in 1994. Eileen Myles, I don't have to tell you, is a truly iconic figure in our city and has been for decades. I remember you, Eileen, from my own early days at the Gotham Book Mart, at parties with John Ashbery and Gerard Malenga, with photos of Marianne Moore, Anais Nin, T.S. Eliot, Gregory Corso, Frank O'Hara, and Dylan Thomas on the walls downstairs in the shop, and upstairs in the gallery where the famous life photograph of Auden on a ladder, Marianne Moore in her tri-cornered hat, Elizabeth Bishop, the Sitwells, and others emblemized the lineage of that treasured place. The night of that photograph, November 10th, 1948, Bishop returned afterwards to her artist's garret on King Street and wrote to a friend, "I'm exhausted all over, but particularly the face, which I suppose comes from wearing a horrid fixed grin for so long. I've just put some Arden lotion in the icebox, and I'm looking forward to lying down and putting a nice cold washcloth full of it on my poor hypocritical features." Oh, well, we miss the Gotham. This is a moment of genuine apotheosis for Eileen Myles. There have been scads of wonderful articles about her in the Times and elsewhere, and a character based on her and played by Cherry Jones read part of her poem, School of Fish, in an episode of Jill Soloway's Transparent. She's an extra, right? Is that how? A glorified extra in the same program. That moment in the episode is a moment of falling in love. Real evidence that poetry can do that, Eileen has said. Also, love is trouble, which is one of the things that is so great about it. I first encountered Eileen's work in a Black Sparrow edition, purchased at the Gotham decades ago. Her new books are published by Daniel Halpern of Echo Press, the greatest literary entrepreneur of our generation, editor of the phenomenal literary journal Antaeus, absolutely foundational in the reading lives of so many of us here in New York and across the country. Her book is a generous selection of work from her addictive poetry from 1978 to 2015. And the back of the jacket is festooned with praise from John Ashbery to Lena Dunham. So afterwards, the books are for sale. Her books are for sale. She'd be happy to sign them for you. And we'll have a short Q&A after Eileen's reading, and I hope you'll participate. So please be thinking of some questions, and I'll lob a couple her way and then alternate with you all. So now let's welcome the Poetry Society of America's 2010 Shelley Memorial Award winner and Guggenheim Fellow, poet and writer Eileen Myles, described by Dennis Cooper as one of the savviest and most restless intellects in contemporary literature.
Hi, you guys. Alice, that was great. Thank you so much. I'm over this, right? You can see me, huh? These are intense. This is intense law furniture we have here. Oh, hi, Anna. And there's a crazy slope right here, too. It's just gonna get. It's a big room, but it could be a little fuller. Oh, shit. So I think I'm going to start with some older stuff from the book, and then a handful of new poems. There's a weird, I'm just going to complain about the furniture until it's just like, there's a weird shadow, too. This is not designed for a poet, I think. Moving over to the golden furniture. Okay, this is called The Sad Part Is. I love the way the guy in the laundromat, the way he hands things to me, smiling, a nice pink slip with a black number on it. I've just handed all my clothes over to him. They're quickly weighed, priced. He writes the price down on the slip, and it's okay. He smiles, I smile, I walk out. It's funny how I sit in this, the inner sanctum of my apartment, with the stove, the refrigerator, overhead light. Down there in the dark by the window, I've got a desk, but I like it over here. It seems warmer, though, the radiator's down there. I live in a small place, and when I'm alone, I make it smaller. Prefer it this way. Keep the action in a small, bright place. Wonder where I'm going, but tonight I've got this light. I can handle your silences. This one's called No Poems. You know, I want to dedicate this reading to a friend of mine who just died, a woman named Mary Rattray. And she was in her late 80s, so she had a long, great life. And she grew up in East Hampton, and she was part of a family that had, her brother was my friend, the poet David Rattray. But Mary grew up in the Hamptons and, ran away with a French teacher when she was young and went off to Paris in the 40s and had an amazing lesbian life, and then came back to Long Island and had an equally interesting heterosexual life, and knew Frank O'Hara and painters and everybody, and was so smart and was, bilingual, of course, and just was, like how you have kind of pseudo families that kind of get you in ways that your own families didn't and don't. And Mary was my friend, and I'm sorry she's gone, but she was amazing. So I just want to give her a reading. And this poem is called, wrong. Hang on. This poem is called No Poems, but I have to find it now. What the hell is it? Oh, yeah. I figured this reading out in bed, anything can happen there. And this was I guess there's a lot of death today. This was at the grave of a poet who was important to me, a guy named Jimmy Schuyler, who I think gave maybe his last reading here, so I don't think this is my last reading, but nonetheless, I think of him. It's called No Poems. It was a little golden cross, wooden like a ruler, really, wrapped round with pink flowers. Then Anne, she put a small cut glass vase of more pink flowers. She leaned across the hole. She couldn't quite. It was awkward, so the monk took the vase and placed it for her at the foot of the cross, and things were even more so. There was a hole in the ground, and in it, the can. We were invited to take a handful of dirt, Earth, the name of the planet, and throw it on our friend, whose burnt remains were in the can. It felt good, cold, strong, old, a handful of planet, here. and I thought, and wiped my hand on the brown bandana Duncan brought. I wiped the dirt from my hand. My friend was buried under a tree. Little cross, stroke of sun hitting its shiny gold. We stood in a circle, the friends, the monks, brown. One monk lifted a spade and shoveled it in, earth to fill the hole, and now he was gone. We stood. It was pretty as a picture as he was taking photographs, the whine of the camera, and then we stood still. We'll probably come back, said Duncan. Huh, that's what I was just thinking. Thanks. Weirdly, what was Jimmy was in a can, which is the strangest part, of course, is about how we died today. And we took the Long Island Railroad out there, and we kept joking about, what if we leave him on the train? You know, it was like so weird. And this is called, I am sorry, this is like another this one's called Last Supper. I was feeling a little wilted in bed today. It was Wednesday night, and the food was so hot, the tree sat undecorated. I watched the men in the takeout shop, falafel men, spoon sauce generously, and I thought, make it good for me. This is my last supper. The shape of the little tomatoes, what is that shape? Oval, like an eye, the bottom of the boat, a death boat? Connie pointed it out, embedded in the architecture of the Guggenheim uptown, death tucked in all its wise corners. I missed out on Peggy's house in Venice one day, the day it was closed. Looked through the black gate of Peggy's house. Hi, Peggy, dead at 138. Can I tell you what I ate today? Besides a falafel platter, I had a bird's nest and then a slice. And before that, let's see, am I boring you to death? I had a couple of bananas, a little too ripe, bright yellow, some cheese and crackers, beige and blue. I had some banana bread, tan. And you know what I thought at the gym tonight? I really thought it. It was really bright, and I was naked. I was standing in the shower like a mooing cow, staring into the light. And I thought, life, Peggy, life is the only privilege, and the only real toast is food. Now, thank you. This one's called Merc. And it's M-E-R-K, and not the drug company, and not the dark light, just Merc. I think it was like somebody had called, it was like in the moment of answering machines, and somebody left a message, and they said, my name is Merc, and the machine cut them off. And I was so pissed off that day, I was like, rah, I'm gonna write a poem at you. There's too much light in my life. There, that's better. The street people recommend, don't let your brother fling his leg and arm around you like you're his girlfriend, humping your kneecap, stuff like that. The vilest smell of all tonight is human food. It's November when the moons switch places. White is bad, black is good, food stinks. Carrying their buckets of soup to their stupid abodes, furs around their necks, beasts. What do humans eat? Dogs, more or less. Ripping fruit from the vine, snipping the crop. Maybe vegetables would like to let their baby be too, and never eat the human. That is a crime. Push my machine to see what Nazi called me. Go out and kill her with my teeth. I'm a bored outsider. The season is cold. Everywhere doors are slamming, and look who you're in the room with now. Someone to eat, I hope. Think of Goethe, Werner Goethe, with his big leg flung up on a rock in Italy. Take a bite of that fat calf. He's like a big posing gondola. What's the idea? Every poet I know is a partial artist. The lucky ones are dead, naturally incomplete. But look at everyone you think of hanging on to some misapprehended particle of modernism, all plumped up with pillows. There's nothing after a modern idea for poets. All they do is think and eat. If you call that making something, and I don't call that art. We must offer ourselves up as food or eat someone. If you can make there be less of someone else, or someone can take a bite out of you, then you can join in the incompletion or excess of your age. I'm sick of seeing dunces celebrated. That's the job. Someone that looks good in ribbons. Someone surrounded by their editor's arms. Love object of a lesbian, but not being one. Particle board, potential screenplay, plastic hair, translates well. Millions will hold you on the train. Bite me now, bite me forever, and you're too strong. Oh, eat me, read me something. I am the daughter of substitution. My father fell instead of the dresser. It was the family joke, his death. Not a suicide, but a joke. How could I accidentally get eaten? Slipping into your sandwich or refrigerator, sort of a dick that crawls up from the bottom of your ice cream cone. It's too late for some of us, but for others, you're like, poetry is really creepy, right? It was like, it's too late for some of us, but for others, it's never late enough. Tonight, when they moved the lights and everything looked completely horrible for a change, I was looking for sympathy, and you asked me for the menu. I have escaped the unseemly death of the alcoholic, yet I keep my ear so close to the ground, and I know what they know. I begin to smell funny, another fate. It was as if I was falling last night, but I imagined myself a bit of food, and I was safe in your mouth, and I would never die. It is the legacy of my family to change in the air and smash as something new. Not a woman, but a chair full of flowers. Not a poet, but a donut or a myth. Go up there and get me a cracker, darling. And proudly, I walked. Nice. That last part is actually about people being drunk at midnight mass, and somebody was Catholic and somebody wasn't. And so the drunk one was like, go up there and get me a cracker, will you? I was like, that's so great. For a Catholic, that's just the funniest thing in the world. I was just like, I love you. I'm just going to keep going dark and dirty. This seems to be going well. This one's called My War is Love. And if you guys, if you go upstate, there's the great, the Hudson River School of Painter, Frederick Church, has this amazing house called Olana. It's like one of the amazing things about the state that we live in. But I had gone there for the first time. My war is love. I was moved. Something that didn't happen in sex happened in my eyes. I feel like some old veteran. You left your marks on me. I could feel the concessions brewing storm clouds in the distance, upstate New York and its stabbing vistas. You could see the man who knew so much had a lousy house, Thomas Cole. The other one had insurance money. It makes a difference. You know, Hartford, 91. But nothing can protect us from heartbreak like weather, the death of a child. We walk through their house, spotting views. As you move through the house at the sculpted trees, it was only death in their eyes. I think of the past that way, upstate New York, these men's big mansions, a little baby grave. I think of my love as a dead child, cunt like the barrel of a gun, scraping myself against you. The words are gone. I'm watching my love grow invisible. Both my parents had these tiny children, sisters and brothers we never knew. Every Veronica makes me sad. A baby's grave is like a little belly, baby graves in my eyes. If the most innocent victims of a war, loved, most invisible, the pig won. And that makes me glad the farmer had to dance and the animals watched, but the pig had to sip and survive, the pig in a house. I think about walking in these houses with you, that once upon a time you would know that the sun set there and we had a river. The battle is lost, I sob, in the middle of war. They twirled the house round and round in their heads. He died when the century was won. Each window was a perfectly imagined day. When it rained, the eyes cried, battered by weather. So many days, empty the trees and the eyes see far. All the maroon fortunes of the churches, the precious little family like a life in a box. I was haunted by views, something that the rich leave to be. Sit down and smile around, the flapping of days, the windows close, and the day turns in. We light a lamp in our eyes. You're like, shit, get happy, right? It was like, it's, this one's called, maybe I want to give you some joy. I do it. Okay, this is a sestina, and I wrote it because somebody asked for it, and then he said, "That's not a sestina." It was like, go to hell. It's like, so actually, that was spontaneous. The name of the poem is "To Hell," and this is like 2 elections ago. The Diet Coke sounds the same as beer. Okay. To hell for Jay. I'm not sure who I walk with. You know how Sestina works, right? Certain words. So if you hear words come back all the time, you're like, it's not like I have a very tiny vocabulary. It's that I'm a very skillful poet. Because just watch this shit move. It'll be amazing. I'm not sure who I walk with in America today. I miss you, my imagined accomplice, while we're moving among men. One man stands up and says his daughter's gay. Like, we didn't know that, she says. He thinks it's so great. We can't think it's so wonderful being lied to for years. We've accomplished bright cynicism, then struggle for love. We flounder, we fail. The elephant eliminates the confusions of love. Love probably didn't need a war, couldn't eat, is rolling on waves today. The city is emptying. The elephants have been planning that party for years. I'm heading into it, New York, my home, bursting with men. Conservative women heading downtown to see a cross made of girders. Great. Jesus marked this city, threw planes at it. Face it, those pilots were gay. We're going to make a constitutional amendment against them for being gay. Gay to hit buildings, to want to meet in great numbers, being no one love. Moving like an angry sunflower, wanting bandages, space, something great. I want to live here feeling celebrated for breathing open today. I want to show you complicated dyke love, construct a poem about women and men. In my country, there's a basic responsibility to struggle, and not for years. To walk away, to turn around, seeing you and progress, and be loving your smile for years. Sometimes I think there's complication with men, but I'm probably gay. Gay to be glad to keep expressing and knowing the impossible hopes of women and men. I would want to learn more, be firmer, open up, revolutionize love streaming. A house on a hill is pretty, but there's something rhapsodically fine today. Stay here while the American ship is moving and rocking, invincible, great. My moment alone in front of everyone is hopelessly great. I don't have to wonder where I'm going this time or this year. I don't have to wonder whose group I'm in today. Certainly the people who always think the public problem is theirs are gay. When the moment comes to move like trees to free the city I love. I don't know John Kerry, and we can name that feeling Buddhist for the next 4 years. The pond reflects the sky. If the highway curls, it's gay. A public moment, a political moment is what's possible today. We trust more than men. Something's eating our years. The uneven horizon's great, and of course she's gay. The buildings are falling in love, and we opened its eye today. This one's called Your Name. It's very hard to hunt from indoors, I'll say that for you. And text is at best an attenuated warning. Sound has a range of many desires, not just map. I subscribe to the Grandpa Bunny school of theory. I mean, Genesis to write is a form of accounting, an approximate promise in the sunny mouth of time. A horny bet, or else hunters lolling around the fire. What did you get? How can we avoid this making a speech? Long-limbed and maybe in July. Aren't we lucky to have captured each other in this hideous neon light? Now you're like stuck. You're going to have to applaud every poem because you'll think, I'll be hurt if you don't. This one's called Smile. It's just not as much fun without a good light and a sharp knife. I mean, leaning into the peach of it. People find the time to get theirs sharpened or use yours. That drip in the kitchen is like someone I know. You know them too, right? That was like that, yeah. Today's cold is like an affirmation of the purchase of yesterday's new shirt. I knew the cold would come sometime, but today, I'm wearing that drip most of all. My half-made meal and even the space that surrounds the incredible possibility of hunger on and on, like my favorite man, Frankenstein. The drip has tones, a relationship with the holding bowl that is only holding water. All these rhymes all the time. I used to think Mark Wahlberg was family. So was Tim, but close to his death, he told me he was adopted. Every time he smiled, he thought, Eileen is a fool. Or that's what love looks like. If I woke and my master was horrified, I would go out into the world with this enormous hurt. And I have carried mine for so long, I now know it's nothing special. It's just the fall and the sound of her sirens. It's the agony of being human. Not a dog who dies maybe 6 times in the lives of her masters. Everyone's phony and made up. Everyone's a monster like me. Now I know everyone. So I'm going to read some newish ones now. It's okay, right? I sort of felt like Dottie when I did that. It was sort of a Dottie thing to do. She would sort of, she's going to go and do it, but she would like guiltily ask you if it was okay. It was like this kind of public flirting thing she did. This one's called Lark. This is part of the fascinating experience, which is I should have brought some. The fascinating experience, which is my life today. This is like in the New York Review of Books. I was like, what the hell? I was like, what got into them? So, Lark. Anything could possibly become anything else. It was the condition of this dream. Things could blow themselves right into other things. Not like a collision, but a blend. It was like there was a wind in this universe, and conversion was the rule. I was telling her about the thing ending, and I did notice that who I was talking to was my ex. Not the 2015 ex, but the 2013 one. She didn't seem to know who she was or be particularly perturbed not to be herself anymore. She was simply her, thoughtful, even a little concerned. I guess it got weird when I tried to talk about my feelings. Feelings? She shrieked. She became the most magnificent storm, not even a being anymore, but a spell, a giant boat rocking roar. I guess it was pretty absurd of me when you put it like that. Eileen, called the voice out the window. She had come with her husband to pick up the strap. Who would want to spend the rest of their life with a fat, bearded man? But of course, that could be Brenda herself. I could be this house or that silvery ceiling lamp, looking down, my love, that distant car, turning, passing. Tiny limbs in the blue sky, planes overhead. My fingers on this pen, being everyone, sighing, turned. Okay, this is, I have a little speech about this one, which is, it's like the history of my reading, which is that when I was in college, I've told this story before, but it's intimately attached to the poem. When I was in college, I went to UMass Boston, which was like city college, and it was like where working class kids in Boston went to school. And it was great because there's this Irish-American experience that's sort of disgusting, where it's all about, leprechauns and Danny Boy and stuff. And so at UMass, we learned that there was like, Finn McCool and Irish legends and James Joyce and whatever. But we also studied Welsh literature, which was amazing. And so there were these great poems that were called gnomic stanzas. And there's a Penguin anthology of Welsh verse, which is incredible. And there was like these poets with names like Dafydd ap Gwilym. And they write in these crazy, rhyme schemes and stuff. But these gnomic stanzas were always it was like a nature poem, and it would be like, 3 leaves on the tree, the guilty flee, though no man pursueth. So it would always be like some weird little line and some pretty line. And so it just, 40 years passed, and I moved to Texas, or I started living in Texas, and then suddenly it comes out. So this is called Western Poem. I just wanted to trace my influences for you. Purple clouds, my doubts. Iridescent cream, my loss. Purple mountains, my friends. Buzzards circling overhead, my hopes. Birds singing, jagged singing, my indecision. Wrecked skinny tree, my past. Photographs I send home, my indiscretion. Amber street light, my reading. My appetite, my appetite. Red striped sky, my confusion. Bright yellow, gray sky, my ardor. Car lights, my commotion. Telephone pole, my wishes. Stop sign, my fear. Family dollar, family dollar. Courthouse, my opinion. Black cloud, white sky, hesitation. Black cloud, white sky, bliss. Blinking signals, my intentions. Black mountains, too many suggestions. Skipping white lines, my attention. A young cowboy first saw the lights. A young cowboy first saw the lights. The horns on your van, my defensiveness. That old train, my dreams. That old train. And this is sort of a poem to a computer. It's called You. After all these years, you should know my font. You should know the numbers go in the middle. What I say. There's so many of you. Why don't you talk each time I have to click and press? What's the use of being famous? It's an incredible poem. This is called Circus. Jill tells me about the show she is making, and I thought, it's like flowers. What kind of flowers am I making? I think that I met you at work. Now I'm home now and think, what kind of flower am I making? How do we find the flower, use the flower, spread it around? I thought summer's a good growing season, or is it? Is summer just hot? I could bring my flowers to your flowers, always afraid when I show that maybe I am making a funeral. Whatever I am when I show it around, I love your flowers. A fingertip has so many hands, and you love mine. How is it to love for once and see it all, now to be so afraid of loving and dying? Mounds of flowers go to my head. I love you inside there, also out to show. I want to bring you so many flowers. This is my next book of poems is going to be called Evolution, and Grove is going to do it. And they're going to do it my dog book. I have been writing a dog book, and it's coming out next year, and they're going to do that too. It's about my late, great pit bull, Rosie. So this is called Wet Paris. I think of this as sort of an NYU poem, because NYU has like an empire, and one of them was in Paris, and I happened to be there reading, and this is sort of about that. Wet Paris. A little dog afraid of lightning stands up to speak. Hey, Mutt, be brave. I felt an empty spot with all the men standing outside the bookstore. Notre Dame never was so brave. And the river. Have you ever been here before? Yes, I was when I was a kid. Wasn't Paris just a man who loved a woman too much? That's how the story goes. I am starving and the traffic is slow. I miss the whole brouhaha about conceptualism because I am sleepless and corny. Isn't that enough? Must I lay down my heart? I brought my chalice right up to the fountain. Hi, Alice. And I drank. This is called Television. I guess I'm very attached to the small boats moving across the deep blue sea in a world much older than ours, but maybe the same. It speaks to me, the smallness of the boat, the bigness of the night. The shot is wide, and I somehow feel close. I want to speak this enormity to you. I feel like that, or I sing like that. Not modern or loose at all. I'm loose like a tiny boat in a wide cove, opening out into a bigger body of water. I relish the small ripples like lines that hold my boat. It's so quiet in the morning. I imagine myself seen in what's seeing me as a forlorn love. Can you understand this at all? It's kind of lost in a color or a tone, something really old and bound up with everything in the moving picture, and then I am gone. It changes into day or a cartoon, but for the stretch of that voyage, I am known. That applause is getting weaker. It's like, I just love you. It was a. This is a fake because I've been reading from my selected, which is like a lot of older work. So then I thought I should start making fake old work. So this is called Notebook, 1981. It's like I was so willing to pull a page out of my notebook a day, several bright days, and live them as if I was only alive, thirsty, timeless, young enough to do this one more time, to dare to have nothing so much to lose and to feel that potential dying of the self in the light as the only thing I thought that was spiritual, possible. And because I had no other way to call that mind, I called it poetry, but it was flesh and time and bread and friends, frightened and free enough to want to have another day that way, tear another page. Yes. You like that one? I don't know. What am I doing? Maybe another poem or two? Oh yeah, this is good. This is also called You. I'm bravely eating my croissant at everyone. That was such a big, I read that in Paris. It was like a French word. It was really good for them to hear. I'm bravely eating my croissant at everyone. I'm living on my wetboard. I'm living on my money, limits set, and the lights lower. I worship the blue marks on the hydrant, how like the name of a flower. And this is, why don't I just end with this one? This is like the title poem of the new book, so it's called Evolution. Something unearthly about today, so I buy a Diet Coke and a newspaper. A version of me, something about me on the earth and its sneakers, and feeling like the earth's furniture, but that can't be true, or like the Coke and the Times, it's true for a little while. I'm not the earth's furniture, not entirely, and I seem to want to go about this in the entirely wrong way. My face asks the man at the deli, "Do you know me?" And he clearly didn't answer me enough. "I'll get this," I said, picking up the paper, hoping that he just might know me a little bit more, but not enough to make me feel absolutely true. I'm just not true enough, so it's probably the weather, an overripe September, and we're agreeing that the winter will probably be pretty cold. That feels good and true, I thought, talking to Jill, who was my trainer. She shows me what to do, and I feel a little better after that, and I thought, I don't want to be like that poet, I thought. He's just like a prisoner of the planet. And that's what's sad about him. I could say, unlike me, who is like a temporary chair, but I'm actually what's on the chair. I'm using this pen on a purple notebook set up on the angle of my thighs. My thighs. I've had you since I was a kid. I've known you for so long, even when you betrayed me in the bathtub one night when you were rabbits. But that's because I was going crazy. Is it crazy to be the citizen who's only partially here, like kissing while your eyes anxiously are surveying the room, kissing at a party, but there's nobody there but this person with not so many characteristics, and she will list them so she can continue writing. That's what I like about this act, the sea of blood and consciousness and barely repressed craziness that's singing in my ears, only likes one thing, always like her favorite food. The gulls in my head can do whatever they want, and I can't ever use a wrong word at the right time, and this is it, when the earth only wants me this way, ignoring the seagulls and writing. I could stop here because the Coke is so good I want to go further, longer. Where should I go? My foot scrapes against a book, wondering. Today I discovered that to talk about certain things makes me sad, so I'll stop. There. My arm rests on a pillow. That feels pretty good. I cherish this time alone. When I go out, I think, why am I here? I'd like to change the very characters I'm writing in. If I could stop thinking about, if you know me, what else could I do? I could go to the movies. But afterwards, it would be me talking about what was so obviously wrong. And now I'm picking wrong words, and so I've gone on too long. And the gulls came back, and the truck's outside. I know the loneliness of love and the loneliness of being outside and looking out the window when love is gone. But this face that turns and listens in my home and wonders if you know me is lost and will never be found. And something new starts up in my building, a different sound. Thank you.
Your style and your stance radiate such a great sense of freedom. It's really, really.
To say thank you. Thank you.
That's great. So you said once, without poetry, for sure, I wouldn't be here at all. It was my love. So you came to the city in 1974,
Uh-huh.
and did you instantly gravitate towards the East Village?
No, I think I instantly gravitated towards where I had friends who had apartments.
Yeah.
So that was the Upper West Side, and even though there wasn't room for me, that's where I lived because they were the only people I knew in New York. And so I had a group of, it was one of those Upper West Side apartments with like 900 rooms, and it was so cheap, and we had an elevator and a picture window looking at the river, and we all left. And it was like $200, it was insane. Because everybody was moving downtown. I moved to Soho for 2 years, and then it became clear that the poets, as I understood it, then lived in the East Village, and that it was even cheaper than Soho. So I hit the East Village in 1977.
I think we have such a great sense of your apartment and of your days there. I mean, I really feel that apartment, and when it gets tighter and tighter, seems to get more exciting. You mentioned that in one of your poems.
I thought I would
interesting.
start small today, which was where I was.
Yeah. So you were director of the Poetry Project. You've toured the country in a minivan in an all-female poetry group called Sister Spit. You
Woo.
ran for president. You ran for president too. You were just pursuing female votes, though. But you did tour.
No, I wanted all the votes.
Oh, you wanted
I
all
wanted,
the votes?
Yeah, I wanted as many votes as I could get.
Well, could you talk a little bit about the experience of being close to James Schuyler? I think so many of us absolutely adore his poetry.
It was pure luck, because I think when I came to New York, I very briefly went to Queens College to get an MA in creative writing, and the guy who taught the poetry workshop brought in a poem by Frank O'Hara and a poem by James Schuyler, and I was like, what is this? Because it was like this kind of moving fairy tale. It was like something I had never seen before. It was so easy, and yet it was so mysterious. And so I was like, okay, how do I meet this guy? And I heard that he was part of this extended community of poets coming out of St. Mark's. But then I quickly heard you will never meet this person, and and they told many stories about him. But then just through one of those wonderful flukes that is the poetry world, I was standing whining about how poor I was one night at a reading, and somebody said, well, there's a job you could have, and it was basically working as James Schuyler's assistant, which was just nuts. And so, yeah, I worked for him for half a year.
Was he at Chelsea then?
He had just moved. He had been in a hospital, and before the hospital, he had lived in a really crummy hotel, which is probably now very expensive condos.
Yeah.
And so I sort of literally moved him into the Chelsea, which was really fun. So I got very intimate with his scraps of paper and his clothes and his whole. But so I wound up knowing Jimmy very well, which was like one of the great gifts.
Yeah, I mean, in my years at the New Yorker, he never sent a poem in, but I think it was David Lehman who sent poems. Somebody visited him and took the poems and put them in an envelope and sent them to us, and that's how we got them. So he had really withdrawn from that whole process by the time you were working with him, had he?
Well, I think he always was kind of. I mean, he was sort of a bon vivant and a shy guy, and I think he had a long career of being a gay man in the art world and knowing people. And so I think there were in times and out times. And I think one thing though I will say, he always knew how good he was. He was utterly confident as a poet and as a writer, and wasn't worried at all about, he knew that people would bring his poems to you. You know what I mean? Like and this is one of the, I was like, whoa, do I know this? Like, and even, as a female, I would look at him and think, will somebody do this for me? If I crash and burn like this? But there was he did have that thing, which was that he kind of, because you get it through your relationships. I think part of being a poet is people knowing you and seeing you and telling you that you're that poet, And so he was in a profound art economy, in many ways. And his readers, I think we all survive by our readers being our friends. And that's the first ring and the second ring and the second ring. And so his first ring was a really good ring. And so, it protected him too,
You're new and selected as having just the effect that a publisher dreams of, don't you think? How do you account? I mean, I was talking to.
That wasn't even an answer. I just went, I growled. Yeah, I guess so.
No, it really is. I was talking to Elizabeth Streb, the action artist.
Oh,
yesterday,
yeah, she's great.
and she's having a great moment. And Joan Jonas, the performance artist, is having
Right.
great moments. And now you. It makes me so happy, and it actually made me think of that wonderful Seamus Heaney poem that he wrote to his brother. My dear brother, you have good stamina. He was a farmer. You stay on where it happens.
Oh, that's nicely put.
But do you think it really is just patience, just waiting and?
Yeah, I think, and then being lucky too, you know. But I think like if somebody says, you know, like if a young writer says, "What should I do?" It's like you just keep writing. You just don't. You helplessly keep writing, and you write through your life, and you write through everything that's happening, and you see where that takes you, you know. And I think poetry is a gig, in the truest sense. It's a carriage, and it carries you through your existence, you know.
Have your early best and favorite poets remained your best and favorite poets?
Well, yeah, to a certain. I mean, like Jimmy was one of them, and John Wiener is another one, and certain old friends, Susie Timmons, who's somebody of my generation who kind of like did a thing that poets do, which at a certain point she was like, I want to be a paleontologist. I don't want to be a poet. And she just went away for like 20 years, and then she came back. And like Wave just published a big fat edition of her work, and suddenly all these younger writers are discovering her, and she's incredible. Yeah. You know, I mean, other poets, there are poets. Lucille Clifton is somebody like I always teach and think about and love her work. I mean, I kind of read the same poems over and over again. I mean, I'm excited about finding new writers, you know, and I have a list of people that when people say who's good, who's new, I always say this, you know, it's C.A. Conrad, Ariana Rines, Erica Doyle, Simone White, Mira Gonzalez, you know, there are people that I've become friends with, you know.
That's great. So do you have any questions? Anyone
What do you
wanna?
think, you guys? Is the mic going to come to them or something?
I think
or
there
is
are
that-
mics there.
is a-
Do you want to step up to the mic then?
This is the place from which questions can be asked.
Yeah.
as
Oh,
well
so
as
you
this
have to
place.
go there.
Yes.
Person in first row. Oh.
Hi, thank you so much for reading and being a poet and everything. You're really amazing. I'm sorry. My question is, I was reading about, you know, the human rights campaign, and there's this thing Bernie Sanders called them establishment, and then I looked it up, and one of their biggest contributors is a giant arms manufacturer called Northrop Grumman. And I didn't live in the 70s, but I'm assuming something like that would have been unthinkable at that time. And I wonder what you think as a poet and a really sensitive person, I think about the way that as a society we're getting so much more attuned to microaggressions and, you know,
Right.
subtle like sensitivities, and yet at the same time, like, aggression is becoming more acceptable in some ways. I don't know.
With the last part of that, did you capture the last part of that question?
Which part is the last part? The part about microaggressions?
About no,
Or
after that, about something being acceptable.
well, that violence is acceptable, that
Yeah.
war is acceptable.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what
I mean, the thing that's, I think the thing that's very strange about right now, though, is that I think we're living in like spectacular times. Like, I feel like I don't mean at all to undercut how much aggression and violence is happening right now, but I think what's intense about right now is that we see it in a way that because of media, because of social media, because of the fact that like in Houston, there's an enormous amount of people being shot, basically African American men being shot in the street by the police department in Houston. But Houston, for some reason, they haven't been videotaped, so they can't ever have a trial almost and that's rare because really the reason why we know most of the things we know right now is because of our phones. You know, that it's like sometimes we still feel impotent after we see what happened, and then there's some horrible trial, and the cop still gets away with it, you know? But I think the thing that's intense right now is that we see everything, you know? And I think it makes it hard to know what to do about it or where to go with it. And you know, I mean, I think we're having one of the most vituperative, I mean, like this election is very scary and passionate, and I mean, like, how much time do you guys spend on social media fighting with people? I was like, oh my God, I was like fighting in bed today, you know, like, because I wrote something about Hillary Clinton, and I knew I was taking a real chance because I think Bernie Sanders represents my politics more, but I'm also afraid of, I'm opening a whole can of worms now. I'm totally afraid of Donald Trump. And so I wound up having sort of a complicated way of saying how I supported Hillary. And
I think you did a very good job with that.
Well, thank you. Yeah. But I just got torn to shreds on Twitter, you know?
Yeah,
and then it was interesting.
It's not the way we feel.
It's like, but that's what we do. I think the thing, it's very strange how we live right now because we have so much knowledge and we have so much awareness and we have so much capacity to respond. And so you wind up reacting all the time. And also, I think, things are presented to us in such huge ways. Like somebody like Donald Trump is just a giant cartoon, you know? And it's just like, and that's moving to people because we're like numb, and there's such a, you know, we're so over-messaged that only a cartoon can get through on some levels, you know? So I guess I'm not sure how I'm really responding to your question, except to say that I find that we live in really, you know, and I don't know, we're just in a constant state of global war. You know, and
I think one of the things that Eileen is so fantastic at is being really serious and angry, and then also being funny. I mean, you can write a line like, "What kind of hat should I have worn yesterday in my crisis?" Oh, I love that. But also in a poem like Mr. 20. No, seriously, folks, I was born just a few years after the emperor put some big bombs down. And you know why he has no clothes? It's the ultimate power stroke. I mean, that is, and they're like, the media ruins our lives, so we build tunnels in our poems to help the darkness in. I mean, I find these poems very valuable in expressing that sense of helplessness sometimes at how awful things are. I think that's what you're responding to, too.
I mean, I think it is why we write poems. It's sort of like it is the gesture, it is the response. You know, it is what it means to be a sentient being in language. You know, because and also I think there's so many roles. I mean, like, what is a poet? Who was the poet? Who were you when you were growing up? I mean, like, we were all different kids. And for me, I grew up with funny, tough kids, and I was a clown. I was a class clown. So my poems, as serious as I get, would have to be funny because I would be embarrassed to only be serious. You know, and you're still operating out of your own need to get attention and how you would shape that, and your own way of framing anxiety too. You know, lying up in bed awake at night, like worrying and counting and making jokes that you'll tell people tomorrow. You know.
I can't resist asking you if you like the film Carol because you're such a legendary lesbian.
What about you, Alice?
I know. I'm not so legendary, though. I'm not so cool.
I liked it 50%.
Yeah.
You know, it's just sort of like, I mean, Todd Haynes is an amazing filmmaker, but then he's very ornamental. Yeah. You know, so at a certain point I thought, oh, we have to get this person's question. But at a certain point it was all style. You know, and that bothered me. I felt like we sort of lost the body a little bit, you know, and that made me sad because I was so, as a person who was born in 1949, I feel like I was seeing lesbianity in the world I grew up in, which was astonishing. I was like, oh my God, they had gay people then. I know they did. But to witness it in that style was astonishing, and so I sort of wish he brought it a little further. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's such an essentialist thing as him being a male filmmaker, and he didn't have that same need. You know, and would it be different if a woman had made that film?
Well, I
you
think
know,
a
or
woman wrote the screenplay, though.
Yeah,
she
so
did a
we'll
good
blame
job.
her.
Yeah, yeah. I thought they did a good job with it. So where are you?
Please.
There.
So sorry you waited.
I've been hiding so that I don't, obstruct the view. Hi. Thank you so much for spending your life sort of putting words together. Over the summer, I read Inferno, and the last line in the book is, you can actually learn to have grace. And so I wanted to ask you how your definition of grace has changed over the life that you've lived.
Oh, I think it's become more palpable, you know? I mean, I think that, how can I, oh God, this is a hard question. How do I know? I think it's something you try and live in, right? Like, and I mean, it sounds so Catholic to say a state of grace, but I mean, I think grace is sort of like a solution. You do everything you can possibly do, and I think at the point at which you let go, you hope, you know, the hope is that that's where you are. You know, I mean, like, in a way, I think grace is about leaving it alone. You know, it's sort of like in music, we'll say a grace note. You know, it's just sort of like, it was almost over the one little extra thing, and that holds it, you know? And it's like, how do we know that, you know? And I think that's the great mystery of everything, whether it's in conversation or in love or in a poem, you know, is when to shut up, you know, and when to know you just need one more little thing. You know, you're buying somebody a gift and you buy them some big present, but then you think of one funny little thing, and that was the thing that kind of opened everything. So I feel like it's, you know, I feel like it's kind of time, and just kind of like, you know, like we were talking earlier, like staying with it in a way, you know, and it's like beauty will come.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm from north of Boston, and I was just wondering if people...
Whereabouts?
North Reading.
Oh, yeah.
20 minutes north of Boston. And I was just wondering if people ask you about your accent a lot when you read in New York, because I kind of feel it in your poetry a lot, and I was wondering about that.
It's interesting, because I feel like you do, I mean, I think we do write, I mean, like whatever accent or intonation or cadence, I mean, or metabolism, and whatever we live in, I think we write in it. And so I definitely know that I mean, I have more of a Boston accent when I read poems, and even worse when I read prose than I do in my life. You know, it's almost like I saved it for this, you know? and I'm very aware, like I met Robert Creeley when I was in my 20s, and it was like our joke that we were both from Arlington, you know, and that and I read his work, and I think he writes in a Boston accent, you know, and it's so interesting to me. And weirdly, I'm actually going to go, I have a gig at Harvard has a poetry library, the Woodbury Poetry Library, and I'm going to go there and supposedly research for a month. And they have all these recordings, and I thought, how many of the recordings of poets are actually in Boston accents, you know? So that's like my search, is to look for poetry in a Boston accent, because I'm sure I'm not like the only one tooling around, you know. But I know, I mean, it was just like that thing too. I came to New York in the 70s, so it was a question of like, who would I be? You know, and it was you know, it was a moment of like Patti Smith and Bruce Springsteen, and so it seemed like it was cool to be working class at that time. And so, I mean, it's so ridiculous now. It's like, so I thought, well, I'll just be like a working class female from Boston. I mean, who I happen to be. I was like, I'm going to perform, you know. So I think I didn't, because I know often people try and lose their accents to assimilate in various ways, and I just had a sense that it would be good not to do that, and I think it's true, because I think it's like, it's more than, I think when you assimilate, you lose more than you know. You know, I think you lose your body on some level, and I thought I might need it, you know.
Thanks.
Hey.
I wanted to quote another thing that Eileen had said. This was when you issued a manifesto that men should agree to stop writing books for 50 years.
Uh-huh. And make movies, and make TV
and
shows.
Later on you said, well, that's extreme. But I think that movements only grow by hyperbole. It's not that we literally think it will happen, or it should happen, or it has to happen, but it has to be put out there, because I want everything. I don't want delicate change, the chipping away slowly. Screw that.
Uh-huh.
And that sort of reminded me of something that Jill Soloway has said about you, which is that I see Eileen as a wayward, walking country minister posing as a dyke poet. Her mind is the most expansive mind I've ever had the pleasure of being in contrast to. And she goes on to say there's no thought or impulse of mine, whether it's revolutionary, you know, that's ugly. And that perspective totally frees me up to say to myself, more, more, more. And that really, that's something kindred that you have, don't you think?
Something kindred?
is something very sympathetic between the perspective of the two of you.
I mean, we're definitely co-conspirators in a way, you know, because we really, it was sort of a joke. We were like, let's write a manifesto, you know, and it was so crazy and great to like throw this stuff down. And people, I think people respond so literally to things, you know. It was like some guy was like, well, Eileen, you know, like I've just started to write, and why should I stop for 50 years? And I was like, it's more like just live with that thought for a moment. I mean, in a way, it's sort of like when I ran for president. It wasn't like I expected to win, but I thought I could win this room, you know, and that in itself would be a great thing, to like win an hour, to win somebody's total attention, you know, to make everybody think, well, what if men stopped making work for 100 years? What would that be like, you know? And it's just like, it's just a great thought, you know? And I think a manifesto is sort of an abstract piece of art that just prods, you know? But yeah, that's definitely something that was a pleasure to do with Jill. Yeah.
Go ahead. This is really short. Hi. I know you said advice for young writers is to just...
Could you talk into the mic a little more?
Yeah, it's like
I'm
5
nervous.
feet
I won't hear
tall.
you.
I know you said that your advice for young writers is to just keep writing, which is great for sales of moleskins, but not as much for income. Could you talk about like your process when you were first writing and like your first publication and how that came about?
When you say process, so you're saying two things. One, you're thinking about money, which I think we all...
yeah.
Yeah.
But
then you're asking about my process. So what are you really thinking?
More just how you first, like your very first publication, not even book-wise, but then when your first book was published, how that happened, and
right.
you emerged as a young writer.
Yeah. Well, you know, one thing I have to say to that is the thing I think is probably one of the really true things, I believe, which is that it's like the artists aren't out there. They're like the people you know. So like, I think when I first started being a poet, I would like go into bookstores and I would look at the magazines that existed, and it was like Kayak and Paris Review and Caterpillar, and then I would mail stuff to them, and then I would get rejection slips, and this would just go on for a long time, you know. And it wasn't until like I came to New York and I started taking workshops at St. Mark's Church, and then some kid in the workshop had a magazine called Personal Injury. And he was like, will you give me some poems for my magazine? And I was like, I was a little snotty. I was like, is it like a real magazine? It's just like some weird magazine that you made. Do you know what I mean? Because I wanted to be in that magazine. I wanted to be out there, you know? But it was suddenly, when I realized that in the poetry world that I was in, part of the thing of being a poet was, you know, it was like the poet's version of starting a band. You know, like every poet, and this was how it was very much in the 70s and 80s, we all had our magazines, whether you had it for, you know, 1 year, 6 months, 2 weeks. I mean, everybody had a magazine for 15 minutes. Like I had a magazine called Dodgems, you know? And it kind of like opened the door. So when I realized that when Mike Sapol asked me for poems, and I gave him poems, and then there it was, I was like, oh my God. And then somebody else that I hung out with in my poetry world of people in their 20s said, give me, and so I gave somebody else poems. And then I was like, I should do a magazine, you know? So then I did a magazine, and I realized what that meant was that like, you ask all your friends for their poems, and then you go to a few famous poets. And I was like, John Ashbery will give me a poem? This is crazy, you know? And then you think of your own best poem, and you put it in the magazine with all these other ones. And then you stay up, I mean, this is like what you would do in the set. You stay up all night mailing, you know, like, you know, it was all very analog then, you know, like you stay up all night mailing magazines. Like I got the mailing list at St. Mark's Church, and I was like, I could mail a magazine to Andy Warhol? I mean, what I didn't know was that he probably wouldn't read it, but nothing could stop me from putting it, you know, in his building, you know. And so it's just like one of but the point really is that it's like the people you know are the people. It's not those people, it's these people, you know. And sort of like that art starts close, you know, and grows out, you know. It's sort of like, you know, like I knew 3 poets, then I knew 10 poets, you know, and then 20 people into my work. And so then I guess my first book was a poet I knew, a guy named Jim Brody, and at St. Mark, I mean, like, again, it's just like at St. Mark's Church, there was like a Mimeo magazine, a Mimeo machine, and so he said, hey, I'd like to do a book of yours, you know, because I was like 28, I'm like so old, and I was like, I didn't have a book, and what a book meant was that he ran off 160 copies of my book was called The Irony of the Leash, and it was like, and then I could give my book to people and so on. And then I think the next, I remember the first book that was perfect bound, like, because the first, the first book was stapled, and still, I mean, like, I have to say, it's like my mother is 95 years old, and I give her this book, and she pats it. Oh, actually, it's even worse. It's so horrible. It's like I had a girlfriend in the 90s who published with a mainstream publisher, and my mother's been receiving my poetry books for 20 years already, She's like, My girlfriend gives her a copy of her book from Pantheon. My mother this is how bad my family is. She pats the book and she goes, "That's a real book." Like, oh my God. So I would say the only good thing in my life is that my mother, who's in a nursing home, I go to Massachusetts on the train. I was like, Mom. I felt like James Dean, in East of Eden, a book, It's just like, but honestly, my mother just isn't the arbiter of what's hip and cool, It's sort of like, my mother did not get me here, I got me here. And Jim Brody books and Mike Sapol and all the people that published me and everybody that ever went to my readings. It's just like, but the thing that's so weird, and also I will say, so I'm getting all this attention now, and they're like, obscure poet makes good, publishes with big, as if all those years and all those poems and all those friendships were like in the dark, in some weird, fen, some weird swamp. It's like, no, that's the real thing. I mean, this is great, but this is just the institution of all that time, I mean, I just think it's sort of like, trust your friends. Those are the writers, So that's...
I have kind of, I think, a follow-up to that previous question. As a young artist, have a lot of side jobs, and it sounds like you had that too, and I kind of romanticize those side jobs and the effect they have on my work, and like how great it is that actually my life like drives me to do all kinds of stuff that when I thought all I wanted to do was make my work. And I'm wondering if that kind of holds up for you, like as an accomplished artist. Do you still do any kind of side jobs, or like miss any of them, or think of any in particular now?
Well, the thing about having a poetry career is sometimes you think this is such a crappy side job. I mean, it's sort of like, it's sort of like there's lots of you get a lot of emails. You feel like you're working for somebody that gets a lot of emails, but it's you. So you're like, this is horrible, So I mean, like, and part of the trick is trying to, then the job is finding somebody that will help you, and then paying them, and then teaching them how to be you. Which is a job. Everybody who has somebody helping them says it's so much work, and it is. So in a way, there's no way out. Like, work is just, I mean, remember Allen Ginsberg was like, it's like everything is work in this way, So I think the thing to figure out in whatever work it is, including having like a career as a poet, is how to write. I mean, like, how to write poems inside of that. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, so I feel like with jobs, like, I write novels too and other kinds of things, but poems worked for me because you could write them when you're waitressing. You could write them in fact, it's really how I became a poet. Like, after college, I had all these shitty jobs, and I just kept writing poems. And then one day at work, I was just like, oh, what I'm really doing is writing poems. And so I thought, this can be my job. And it didn't mean the shitty jobs were over. It was just more that I had meaning in my life, which was writing poems. So I think to figure out how the jobs, either you write at work or how the jobs don't obstruct you from making work, and somehow make your life more interesting. Finding a job that moves you in some way so that you just, the wind gets into your head and your consciousness and your work. Because I think just money is just always, I feel like I had to make up a new thing every 10 years to make a living as a poet. I thought, oh, I'll be an art writer. That's kind of being a poet,
Do you ever miss waitressing or any of the jobs that have like ostensibly nothing to do with writing poetry?
Yeah, I mean, the job that I always regretted the most leaving was teaching ESL. because I really loved it. I mean, it was like I learned grammar. I was like, this is unbelievable. I was like, really? Is that true? You know, it was great. But also the method that I learned, there was something called the Rasius technique, and there was a lot of repetition. And so you would get rooms full of people saying things together. It was very Gertrude Stein. And also it was just global. You just met, you know, it's sort of like, I mean, I think what I miss is my generation in a certain way, because I felt like what I saw for years was in the same way that you can see where there are wars by which restaurants are coming to New York. You know, like, Ethiopian restaurants. Like, it's sort of like where people are running like hell away from their homeland, you know, to the United States of all places, right? And it's just, and what I would see every 10 years before I was doing work that was really very much about my career, was like what we are doing. And so like in the 80s, I was a legal proofreader, which meant that Wall Street was booming. And so all of us in bands and poets, and we were all down on Wall Street. We were picked up by car services from nightclubs in the middle of the night and swept down to some horrible legal office. And we would stay up all night long, and we were paid like $30 an hour to proofread, you know, American Airlines being bought by, you know. And so I missed the jobs that were my generation. Like we were just suddenly, oh, we're all doing ESL now. You know, we're all doing this. And it's been that way since I got out of college. You know, every few years it was like we were feeding off of something else because we were the marginal people, you know? So it's just like somehow, you know, like, I hate to say loving that, but it's like you gotta, you know.
I felt a stab of jealousy when one of the poets at Columbia said he was moving to LA and he had got a job in a vintage clothing store. And it sounds like that's what starting out is.
Right.
It's really. So maybe one more question, because you want to have time to have
Are you two people?
signing.
Oh, you're.
No, that's Soren, who's.
I know that. I know he's a.
Hi, I was wondering, what punctuation mark do you find most exciting and/or sexy?
Wow. God, sexy. I don't know. I mean, maybe semicolon. But I never use it, and even when I do, I don't try. I think it's incredible. When I use a semicolon, and I feel like people probably laugh, because I'm sure I use it wrong. But when I put it in a poem, I'm like, douche. I was like, look at that, you know? And I feel a little bit that way about a colon, because I'm really not a colon poet, you know? So when I kind of saw that a poem that I was working on, like, a colon would do it, you know, because this is a very confusing sentence, and I thought a colon. The one that I'm really interested in is the math double colon. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like theorem, like therefore. And I think I have that in one poem, and I'm like, oh my God, you know? So, thank you.
John Updike called the semicolon the valet of punctuation. So Eileen will sign books, and let's all thank her. Okay.